we're going to move on to the advocates that Winston has talked about. And for this, our facilitator for the upcoming panel discussion will be Rachel Tay, who is from Eco Youth Collective. So, Rachel?
Thank you so much, Hong and Min, for hosting the first half. And also want to shout out to all the audience who have tuned in so far. I hope the front part has been very meaningful and valuable for you. For me, it certainly has been quite content heavy. So we'll be taking a step back and changing our lenses on today's live stream. So what we covered previously was looking at regions from different Southeast Asian cities and countries, as well as looking at the bigger picture of Singapore. So now we're going to dive more into how activism has been like in terms of civic action on the ground before I move into our panel discussion. So I'd like to introduce Xiang Tian for our next 10-minute segment. So actually, Xiang Tian and I have been friends for pretty long in the environmental scene. And I'm sure if you're calling in having been to green events in real life, you would have seen him as well. He is always dressed in a very iconic attire of a green shirt, a grey shirt, shorts, and slippers. And I'm sure he's wearing that at home right now and feeling very happy that he doesn't need to dress up for today's event. Xiang Tian will be giving us a short brief about what the climate activism scene has been like in Singapore recently, especially because many efforts have propped up on many different fronts. And we want to make that clear before we go into our panel discussion. So Xiang Tian, when you're ready.
Hello. Yeah, just give me a minute to share my screen. Okay. Yeah. So today I'll be talking a bit about the climate activism in Singapore. Yeah. But before I start, I'll just give like a short introduction myself. So my name is Xiang Tian. I'm the co-founder of Lepang in SG. We started off as an environmental calendar, but we evolved to run activities to raise action and awareness about different environmental issues. So like if you want to get in contact with us, you can contact us on Facebook, Instagram, or on our website or email us. Okay. So today I'll just cover like a very short one on notable events, the government's engagement with civil society, and Singapore's plans on mitigation and adaptation. So first, notable events. Like last year, there was the SG Climate Rally. So it's actually quite interesting because it's the first climate rally in Hong Lim Park, and more than 2,000 people attended. And there's a lot of interest generated on climate for that. So I think it's also like the first time that you actually see climate signs being displayed publicly. So previously you see a lot of signs from other countries, but it's not really applicable in Singapore. And then next you have the online climate strikes. So it was organized by the Tingkat Heroes and the Weird and Wild, so they are like Instagram accounts. I think there are about 300 submissions, and it was very interesting because they put pressure on businesses and the government, and they use this government hashtag like Climate Action SG. And it's quite funny because a lot of the posts that you see on this hashtag, right, actually are how do I put this? I guess more individual action. So there will be things like, oh, I recycled today, and hashtag Climate Action SG, or like, you know, like, oh, I brought my metal straw out instead of using a plastic straw, and hashtag Climate Action SG. So yeah, it's quite interesting because if you go and scroll, you'll see a bunch of individual action. Then suddenly like there's a bunch of all these posts. Yeah, and they kind of like took over the government hashtag for a while. So yeah. Then there are also some other things that happen. So like there was a university divestment campaigns. So there's fossil free UNUS and STAN, which try to pressure NUS to divest. And I don't think they managed to get NUS to divest, but they managed to find out more information about how much is invested in fossil fuels. Then there's also another group called NTU Divest that's quite recently formed. And they also managed to find out like how much NTU invests in fossil fuels. So I think there's a speaker on the panel later, Chu, she's in STAN, so you can talk to her and find out more. Then there's also climate change negotiations workshops. So there's this person called Melissa Low. She's actually been to like many conference of parties. So there's the COP that happens once a year where all the countries get together and like talk about how they're gonna combat climate change. So Melissa has gone to COP for like many times, and like I think she realized that, oh, when you go to COP, right, it's all very new to you and you can get lost in the negotiations very quickly. So she came out with this climate change negotiation workshop to kind of like let people know what kind of like before you go, you get a crash course on what happens so that when you go there, you don't actually become lost. Yeah. Then also like there are people in Singapore who have been going to COP since at least 2008. I'm not sure if there have been people who went before that. Yeah. But most of the time people go as observers. So as observer, you just like wear this badge, and depending on your badge, you get to go to different rooms. And in different rooms, they discuss different things. So interestingly, if you go to different rooms, you can see like, okay, which countries they are, trying to push for more action, which countries they are trying to like delay action, and they can argue over like all sorts of points. So like whether how a paragraph should be written, or like where a comma should be put, these kind of things, they can actually argue for really long. So a couple of people who have gone to COP have given speeches there. Like Lastrina, she gave a speech at COP21, and Amira, she gave a speech at COP15. So I think Lastrina is going to be on the panel later also. So you can Google her, but you can also ask her more questions later. Okay, next, government engagement with civil society. So government has been engaging with civil society for some time. So some of it is more visible, right? So like politicians going for environmental events like SG Climate Rally, you see Desmond Lee, you see Louis Ng, and they help. I guess they help to lend some support to the event, right? And show like, okay, this isn't like an anti-establishment event. And also it helps to show that they are concerned about climate change. But there's also other things like closed-door engagements. So you see, I think this was with the National Climate Change Secretariat in November last year. So they were trying to talk to civil society organizations to kind of find out what we think, and like explain some of their rationale behind doing certain things. So I think they also met with us. When did they meet with us? Earlier this year, yeah. I think in about February, yeah, before the COVID lockdowns happened, right? So we met with them. Then they explained to us because they came out with this new enhanced nationally determined contribution, which is basically like Singapore's pledge to the Paris Agreement, right? On how we're gonna support the world to transit to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. Yeah. So so I think in these engagements, they will explain to you, okay, the science says we have to hit net zero by 2050. We have to halve emissions by 2030. But why isn't Singapore doing that? And they explain. And like, okay, so maybe certain things like, why aren't we going 100% solar for Singapore? And like what some of the trade-offs are. Yeah. Then other than this National Climate Change Secretariat, actually, I think MUA, so back then, before GE, it was the Ministry of Environment and Water Resources. Then now it's Ministry of Sustainability and Environment, right? But back then, the MUA, Ministry of Environment and Water Resources, they also engaged like environmental advocates every year at the start of the year to kind of like share what their upcoming plans are and like just check in with the environmental groups. Yeah. So it's not like they totally don't care or don't communicate with environmental people. Okay, then next, the government, they also do meetings with civil society at conference of parties. So here you can see Masagos and Vivian Balakrishnan, and then here you can see Lee Hsien Loong. So there's been interest for whichever like minister goes to COP. There's always some interest to talk to the people who come as well. So like you can talk to Lastrina about this later if you want, because like she has more experience on this. Okay. Now I'll just do a very, very quick sharing on our plans for mitigation and adaptation. So I read this off the National Climate Change Secretariat website on the enhanced nationally determined contribution. So you can see there's actually just two like very important numbers. So one is 65 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. So we want to peak at this level by 2030. But like I said earlier, you actually have to, we are actually supposed to halve our emissions by 2030. So it's a bit, I guess, a bit worrying that we'll be growing when we should be peaking at this year. And then the next figure is this one. We'll halve our emissions by 2050, but by 2050 we are supposed to be at net zero. Yeah. So you can also see in this infographic, they have some things on like what to do for mitigation and adaptation. And I think it's quite, actually the whole like mitigation adaptation thing is quite complicated because there's a lot of considerations. So for example, I think as of now, our power plants actually can supply 2 times of our peak demand now. So when you install more solar, you're not really displacing any new power plants. Yeah, and like going 100% solar also has like other considerations, right? Like, so if you have battery storage, then you have intermittency, and you have blackouts, which is something very destructive. Yeah. So I think something NCCS mentioned was also like Singapore can actually be 100% powered by solar if we covered 70% of our land area with solar panels. But we don't have that kind of land area to spare for solar panels. Yeah, that's why we can't go 100% solar yet. Yeah, and then also, okay, even though I think like a lot of people give the government a lot of pressure over their prioritization of adaptation over mitigation, or like their perceived prioritization, right? Adaptation is actually also very important, because without adaptation, we might not even be around in 2050. So like, can have things like floods, droughts, disruptions to our food supply, rising sea levels. All these can kill us before 2050 if we don't do any adaptation measures. So they are also very important. Just that I guess like as climate activists, we don't really like that focus on adaptation. Yeah. And I think that's about it. That's the end of my sharing.
Thank you so much, Xiang Tian, for that very informative presentation about what's up in Singapore right now. So with that, we'll move on forward to our panel discussion, and I'd like to invite Tri and Lashina to turn on their cameras to join us on the panel here. So what's going to happen is we are going to try and answer 3 questions today together. Oh, hi. Hi. So nice to see you all. Which is, firstly, why should we care? Secondly, what should we do? And lastly, what can I do as an individual? Hi, Min also. So before we start on this conversation, I thought it would be nice if we could just go in a circle to introduce ourselves. But many of you might be wondering, like, who is this new face here? Who's me? I just thought I also introduce myself. My name is Rachel, and as Min mentioned, I am from Eco Youth Collective, but I also told to share like a fun fact about myself, which I discovered today, which is that when I sneeze in multiples of 3 or 4. And I think my hypothesis is that when I sneeze in multiples of 4, like it's when I'm more tired. And my whole family like has sensitive nose and sensitive eyes. So when the haze really came to hit us, it was when we felt it the most. And my mom's eyes were like tear up when there's haze. So like, I used to joke that she was like our haze indicator. So like, oh, it's coming. And I think like when I was younger, like not as involved in the environment, it was when I experienced in a very mild sense, like firsthand of what environmental crisis could potentially look like in a smaller scale. And I think that was when I began my environmental journey sometime later on in school. And afterwards, I had the opportunity to join Xiang Tian at Lepang SG to volunteer with them. And actually, during the lockdown, I began my own organization with a group of friends called Eco Youth Collective. So we aim to bring together pre-tertiary environmental groups and youths to kind of network with each other, provide support, share resources, and also gain mentorship. Because we understand that environmental action starting with and from schools can be very, very impactful. So I'm very humble and honored to be with the panel here today. They're kind of like my senpais, people that mean space, people that I kind of like meet at events and really look up to. So maybe we could go in a circle and introduce yourselves, where you're from, what is your favorite like animal or your favorite natural element, like what do you like about the environment or nature a lot? So Min was giving me a very enthusiastic face, so I think he can start first.
Wow, okay. I'm not sure that's enthusiasm, but all right. So I'm Min. As I mentioned before, I'm the co-founder of Fridays for Future Singapore. And how we started, well, it's not so much started as much as Jamin, our original, like our first founder, she did a school strike in earlier March, and then she posted about it, and then people just started joining through that. As for fun facts about me, I guess. My favorite element, let's see, is fire considered an element?
Yes.
Right. So, I mean, if you think about it, if that's all we're gonna be experiencing for the next few, decades, I should probably get used to it, right? So yeah, I'll go with fire because that's what we'll be having for quite a while. Oh no, maybe water. That's better for Singapore, right? That's probably what Singapore will be experiencing more of. So yeah, water. So Fridays for Future Singapore, what we do is, well, at least before the COVID-19 restrictions, that is, we hold demonstrations and we try to engage students on climate change and climate action, because as others have mentioned before, youth are the ones that are going to be the most impacted by climate change. And in Singapore, there's a sense that if you want to make change, you should like first basically work your way through your career and then go up the ranks of government and so on and so forth. But the thing about Fridays for Future is we don't really think that there's that much time left, in that projections are that we need to be carbon neutral by 2050, and we know that even based on current commitments, that's probably not going to happen. So yeah, we want to demonstrate, we want to rally people towards action now, and we hope to add to climate discourse in that way, just by showing that the youth really do care about climate change, not just the youth, but the people around them, their parents, teachers, so on and so forth. So yeah.
Thanks, Min, for that. When you mentioned about fire and water, I was reminded of Lashrina's background, and it's very coincidentally the same as Prof. Chow's background. So maybe Lashrina, you want to tell us more about yourself and where you're from?
Thanks, Rachel, and thanks to Fridays for the Future for getting me to participate in the panel today. So yeah, my background and Prof. Winston Chow, I think we've been using this for fun to raise awareness about climate change. So maybe to keep this part short, a quick introduction about myself and one fun fact. So a quick introduction about myself. I'm a co-founder of Singapore Youth for Climate Action. It's a platform for Singapore residents to join hands on taking climate action. And we do things like organizing learning workshops, for people to learn more about climate change. We do things like participating in focus group discussions to provide our inputs directly to decision makers. So that's a bit about me and a bit about SYCA. But maybe also at this point, I can share with you a bit of like the personal reason why I think I'm involved in these things. I would say from a more personal point of view, is that my family's quite rooted to the islands. So like from the paternal side of the family, like the islands in Indonesia, my dad was born on Lazarus Island in Singapore. I mean, previously it was known as Pulau Sekijang Pelepah. And I think like just growing up having that sort of affinity with the islands just made me a bit more aware of what's happening in our surrounding areas, not just in Singapore, but also beyond, like Southeast Asia in general. A lot of people, I mean, we have more than 600 million people, right? And a lot of us are living in coastal areas, on low-lying areas. So like to me, I kind of have that. I feel like I have that affinity and also like that familiarity with what other people have to go through. And yeah, long story short, it somehow, I mean, we can discuss this later, but somehow that led me to start SYCA in 2015 with a couple of friends. One fun fact about me, maybe I can focus on one fun fact. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I can pretty much run on 90 minutes sleeping cycle. So I do like 90 minutes or 3 hours and I can survive on that. I don't really need 8 hours. So yeah, one fun fact about me. Yeah.
Ooh, I would love that. It's like a superpower these days. Thanks for sharing, Nasrina. Chu, are you ready? Hi.
Hello, I'm Shuru. I'm a year. Oh gosh, sorry, the traffic. If y'all can hear it. Okay, well, how apt the timing. But yeah, anyway, I'm Shuru. I'm a year 3 global studies and geography student from NUS, and I run an organization called Students Taking Action for NUS to Divest. So it's the main like divestment group in NUS, and we work with fossil free Yo NUS to encourage the NUS management to divest from fossil fuels. Yeah. So what we do is mainly engaging with the investment office in NUS, as well as educating students about divestment. We also work with other universities for the Singapore's divestment movement as well. Yeah. So what my favorite animal, I think it would be a rabbit. I guess it helps to have like, to think of like a cute animal in light of whatever is happening in the world right now, because I think it kind of gets depressing very quickly. So yeah, and one fun fact about me, I used to write Chinese poetry, but after getting more involved in the environmental world, I stopped doing it. It's a trade-off, but I think like to me personally, I feel it's more meaningful. Yes.
Or you could write Chinese poetry about the environment. Win-win. But thank you for sharing. Last but not least, there's Xiang Tian, who already talked a lot, but he can still introduce himself and tell us what's his favorite animal.
Oh, okay. So yeah, my name is Xiang Tian. Fun fact is, wow, I have worked with Rachel, Lashrina, and Chewy before. Yeah, on like different environmental stuff. Actually, all like Lepang Energy. Cause yeah, actually Lashrina's my other Lepang Energy co-founder actually. Yeah. So we started this together in January 2016. It was quite strange because we were just having like dinner one day. Then I think we were talking about something else. Then we were like, why don't we just start an environmental calendar? Then we did that in 3 days. And then after that, we realized that running a calendar is very boring because it's just, unpaid admin work. So we were like, let's organize some like more fun, meaningful events. Yeah, so that's how like Lepang Energy kind of got started. Okay, wait, my favorite animal, right? I'm gonna say this is this crab called the hermit. No, not the hermit crab. The fiddler crab. So this fiddler crab is it's quite cute. The males have like one big claw and one small claw. So basically, like the small claw is for eating, right? Then the big claw is like for showing off and attracting mates. So you can see them in I think like Pasir Ris, Pulau Ubin. So when it's like mating season, you can see like a lot of them just run out and they start waving their claws and like fighting each other. It's very cute. So that's my favorite animal. Yep.
Nice, thanks for sharing, Xiang Tian. Also a quick plug, if you are kind of new to the environmental scene and looking for events to go to, you can head on to the Lepang SG Instagram or website to look for the calendar of events that are happening now. So if we were to move on to the panel itself, I think a lot of discussion in the first 1 hour or so, 2 hours of our live stream was about the climate crisis. We'd like to kind of ground this discussion more in the backdrop of the COVID-19 crisis as well, because that's kind of what's on everyone's minds right now. Even when we leave the house, we have to make sure that we wear a mask, and I always forget. So I'm always constantly reminded that this is real and this is happening to varying extents to different people around the world. So I think the first thing that I wanted to ask is, if the COVID crisis is something that is so prominent in so many people's minds, it's the buzz on the internet and on newspapers, why should we still care about the climate crisis? And if it feels like what Min shared, like we are doomed for fire anyways, why should we still continue to care, and where's that hope coming from?
I mean, I think I would start off by challenging the idea that the message we should be getting is we should be focusing on COVID and nothing else. Like, yes, you can interpret it that way, in the sense that, COVID recovery means we have to get the jobs back, we have to get the economy moving again. And that is, I believe that is the plan that Singapore is going with, but other countries can also adopt what people are calling a green transition or a green recovery. In that after this crisis, we need to build back up in a way that pays attention to the other crisis. And if you really think about it, there are a lot of similarities between COVID and the way that COVID is being handled, as well as compared with climate change. Yeah, I mean, if anything, I think that what's happening with COVID-19, us liking to make fun of America for, not wearing masks, us wanting to try to prove ourselves the leader in being able to handle COVID-19. Well, that was back in April, but still, us handling this crisis should sort of be a wake-up call to what happens to the importance of preventing a crisis versus, let's say, desperately trying to scramble to treat the effects of the crisis when it happens. So, for example, you might ask why climate activism, climate advocacy is important now, but you could have just easily asked why migrant worker rights, why migrant worker living conditions were important in, let's say, January 2020, right? If someone held up a sign and said that, oh, migrant workers should be treated better, they should have better living conditions, then people are still gonna say, well, what about the economy? What about the costs that consumers have to bear? So in that sense, I think that if anything, COVID should prove a reminder that crises have to be prevented and not just treated. Yeah.
So I think for me, how I would like to respond to this question that COVID is happening now, why should we still care about the climate crisis? I think maybe for me to put things into perspective is that, first and foremost, let's acknowledge that both COVID and climate crisis, these are critical issues for humankind right now. However, I think for me that differentiating factor is that we're at this stage where we can still prevent the spread of COVID-19 and we know how to manage it step by step. In comparison to what's happening with the climate crisis, the situation is a bit more complex. The impacts have been felt for some time now, and it's really hard to say whether we can really address this in a way that everyone would want to address it and solve it 100%. So I guess in terms of the complexity of the problems, it's different. And in terms of the impacts on human, it's also different as well. I mean, with COVID, it's quite straightforward, right? Like if you get infected, it's either you recover or the other option. With climate crisis, it's a bit more complex, and you get impacted in various ways. And for me, in terms of the impacts for Singapore and also for Southeast Asia region in general, I think we would be most hit by the rising sea levels, and for Singapore, the food supply. So rising sea levels, as I mentioned just now, it's because lots of us are living on coastal or low-lying areas. And with food security, I mean, for Singapore's context, because we import 90% of our food supply, I know like a lot has been mentioned the past 2 years, like, Singapore is investing in like technology, and we're growing our own food. We are investing, or we're exploring alternatives. But like, to me, at the end of the day, like, for now, like, the number is quite clear that we are importing 90% of our food supply, and that still suggests that there's that element of insecurity. And with the food hoarding that happened because of COVID-19, like, isn't that sort of a preparation, or like it sort of gives us an imagination of what could happen if climate crisis were to impact us, and impact us not just for like 1 month, 2 months, right? But we are talking about like 5 years, 10 years kind of thing. And so like, for me, that's why, like, at the back of my head, like, although these two issues are like happening now and it should be tackled, but like, I think more emphasis could still be put on handling the climate crisis.
I think I'll also be curious to find out then, how would you all respond to people who say that, okay, let's settle the COVID crisis first, and when we are done with that, we take a breather, then we move on to what's next?
I think sorry. Okay, I think both like crises can be kind of tackled together at the same time, because I think like there's this like conception that the COVID crisis needs solutions that will take out resources, and then like that's why there may be less that will be diverted to the climate crisis for now. That's for the time being at least. But like, I think they can be really combined. Like if I'm not sure whether you guys have read like articles, and like this term called building back better will be something that will pop up quite frequently. So like in this in essence, like it's advocating for solutions that build back the economy in a more sustainable way. Yeah. Then like for instance, like for like some people have been thinking about how we can help the like airlines to actually build back better in light of the COVID crisis. So like, how can we like make air travel more sustainable, or like whether there can be alternatives to air travel that will be an alternative source of revenue for these companies in like a future where air travel may be less emphasized upon, things like that. So I think like, yeah, really both crises can be tackled together.
Okay, I was going to say, actually, the climate crisis makes the COVID crisis worse. And if you take steps to reduce like environmental impact, you can actually prevent future pandemics as well. Yeah. So think, for example, like for us, because we don't really experience very bad natural disasters, so it's okay, right? When we have rain, if you have a flash flood, it disappears in like 5 hours or something. But I think in other countries, because of the climate crisis, the weather has become more wild. So they start to see things like flooding happening more regularly. And when it floods, it's not like, Orchard Road flood, then like we can't go shopping for a day. It's like their houses get washed off, so they're homeless. The water goes into their house up to, maybe like their waist. So there's no way they can live in there, and they have to move out and go to live in a temporary shelter until the water subsides. So when you cram a lot of people into a small space, because it's a temporary shelter, right? And then like if one of them has COVID, then of course it will spread very easily through the entire shelter area. So in a sense, you can say like the impact of the climate crisis actually makes COVID-19 spread more rapidly in certain areas. And then also like I think a lot of diseases have been jumping from wild animals to humans, and one part of that is because of deforestation, as well as like the wildlife trade. So if we like deforestation also contributes to climate change. So if you stop deforestation, it could reduce the amount of diseases that jump to humans, as well as help mitigate climate change. So that's my take.
Nice. Thank you so much for sharing. I think we're also transitioning a little bit to the second question. So upon looking at how the world has tackled the COVID crisis, what kind of insights can we draw when we want to think about how can we next combat the climate crisis?
I think drastic action is possible if people really feel like, or like not if people, but if like people in power feel like drastic action has to be taken, it can be taken. So like for example, the lockdown is something that we wouldn't imagine was possible like last year, right? But once you have the pandemic and all these kind of things that would seem impossible previously become possible. So I think like, in the same vein, if people in power see that the climate crisis is something that's really happening now, and it's something that we have to take drastic action to mitigate, then they could do something very, very fast if they wanted to. So like, it's not like, even if they recognize that something has to be done, they can't do anything about it. They can, because they have shown it during this COVID-19 crisis.
I think for me, like the way how I'm interpreting this is like what can we learn from how we are addressing the COVID situation and then replicate that to how we're handling climate crisis, right? I think like one thing stood out for me, which is how the Singapore government is utilizing social media to raise awareness and tell people what to do. So like for me personally, I'm subscribed to the WhatsApp notification service over Telegram and WhatsApp. Oh yeah, so subscribing to the same thing but over two platforms. So I receive the same messages daily. And for me, I mean, psychologically, I just, I'm more aware about COVID. I know what's happening. And then they have all these numbers about, how many people are affected, etc. So like for me, if in the ideal situation, I would like to also then replicate this to how we're handling the climate crisis, right? So just to, also acknowledge, I know there's lots of things going on, and like MSE, NEA, PUB, and all these other like social media pages, they do talk about climate change. But in terms of engagement, you need the user to be on your page for them to receive the news, right? But if they were to have a subscription notice of sort, then it's just easier for them to access the news, and psychologically it's there. I also would like to acknowledge that there are Telegram group chats which sometimes do talk about all these like climate initiatives or like some support group kind of services. So there are Telegram groups like that, but I'm thinking more of a nationwide initiative where you just talk about it and you just get people to subscribe. And I think in the long run, like it just preps people mentally for the climate crisis and push more urgency to the individual to acknowledge that this is happening and we need to do something about it.
Yeah. To add on to Lastrina's point, I think that one important difference between the COVID-19 crisis and the climate crisis is that COVID-19 is much more, I guess, individual than the climate crisis. So, for example, like Rachel said earlier, if she forgets to bring a mask when she goes outside, then she's reminded of that, and it's also against the law to not wear a mask outside. And that's a tangible thing that you can really do to not contribute to the crisis and also not get sick yourself. So in that sense, the COVID-19 crisis is much more personal than the climate crisis. I mean, for example, if I were to say to an average Singaporean that, oh, the climate crisis is gonna get really bad and, you know, cause all these problems that are similar to COVID-19, I guess they can sort of intellectually imagine what that means, you know, like these are gonna be bad things, but it's not as immediate as, oh, if you don't wear a mask, you're gonna get sick. If you don't follow these procedures, you're gonna get sick. And people know what being sick is like, right? They don't know what being a climate refugee means. They don't know what all the, like having your house actually be flooded, what that means. So yeah, I would say that to really get the buy-in of the average person, the average member of the public, you kind of have to make it more personal in that sense. If not, it's just going to be like what Winston Chow said earlier. It's going to be a tragedy of the commons where people kind of know it's a problem, but they're not going to go out of their way to sort of do anything. And in any case, doing anything is like, there's a much higher barrier to entry, right? Wearing a mask versus conducting activism or writing a petition or even having to learn about climate change. So yeah, I would say to really get the public to mobilize behind a crisis, it needs to be sort of brought closer to them in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I think building onto like all the speakers, it's really important for people to be educated about what's happening around, like in terms of the climate crisis, because I think climate change is a very broad topic, and like when people think climate change as this big, huge, like ball of there's a crisis, like it's a bit easier to like feel helpless. I guess like if we have like more bite-sized information, like through like Telegram groups or social media, it might be better. And also to facilitate this education, like what Min said, it's very important to make the content more personal. So like this will be for individual action. I guess like beyond individual action, it's also important to consider systemic ones as well. Like so beyond, like after getting information like about being educated yourself about the climate crisis and like spreading the word through social media and like relating it to other people in terms of how we can like make our own lifestyles more sustainable, then we can start thinking about how we can like go beyond our individual lifestyle changes into like bigger ones, like maybe signing, like organizing petitions to like change certain policies that may be more, that may have like more wide-ranging effects on like in terms of ameliorating crisis. For instance, like there was this online petition suggestion form about the like Singapore Airlines like recent controversial turn of events. So I think that's one form of like stepping beyond the individual action in terms of how we can help crises, like in terms of like climate crisis as well as COVID at the same time. Yeah.
Nice, thank you so much for sharing. I think really helped us to shed light on organizations out there or individuals. If we were to spread the word in our own ways, how can we go about doing that? But I was thinking perhaps we could zoom out a little bit more. I think True, you hinted when she was sharing about some systemic changes and the direction that our green recovery can look like. So I think there has recently been a lot of talk about the COVID recovery task force and how we're working towards making a green and just transition towards like a so-called new normal. So I think wanted to bring together the expertise of each of you from your own organizations. How do you all feel like a Singapore green recovery will look like? So I think it's a lot of frustration out there, right? Because we are very familiar with like the individual, like I have to bring my own cup or I have to not use a straw. But in a bigger picture sense of things, how do you all feel like things will and can change? Difficult question.
I think
Yeah,
that's a
difficult
really
question.
like big question. It's like, yeah, I guess like to work towards a green recovery, it may help if we break it down, like we like we identify our own capacities first, like what expertise do we have, like what networks do we have, what can we leverage on, and then we can think about how we can leverage on these like resources, networks, expertise to contribute towards the green recovery in a way. Yeah, I guess like there's no one solution to. I think like everyone can contribute differently. So yeah, like for instance, as a student, I guess green recovery, we may not be able to like we may not have as much like networks, like professional networks that may, like for example, like linking out with a company for more like cleaner energy or like stuff like that for your own building, like your company's building is sort of like big scale like network. But like at least like we can educate ourselves and like learn more about what we can do, consider careers that may be able to contribute towards this green recovery in a sense. Yeah.
I was thinking more like Rachel was saying like more big picture, right? So I was thinking I mean like if you look at what's the most impact Singapore has, or like what's the worst emitter in Singapore, it's the industry, and then like specifically it's the petrochemicals industry, right? So it's kind of like if Singapore's moving towards a green recovery, then maybe the future after this would have a smaller percentage or have no petrochemicals at all, right? Because I think like what petrochems got hit quite badly during this COVID, because like what the oil prices crashed quite badly, and then there's like no space to store the oil that they are extracting, so it's not like very profitable anymore. So I mean like if you're looking at a green recovery, then it's what can we cut from our economy, and what can we shift towards, right? Yeah, so I think we can try to cut the more pollutive industries like petrochems. Aviation's a bit hard, right? Because like Singapore spent a lot of effort to build ourselves up into an aviation hub. But then if you were to say like, green recovery and COVID makes aviation not viable anymore, then like how can we cut it when we've already sunk so much effort into it lah? Yeah. So actually, actually I'm not very sure what else we can cut, or like what areas we can go into. Yeah, but I think Singapore has committed quite a sum of money into like R&D for renewables as well as climate science. So like as part of like a green recovery, we should definitely move towards that kind of stuff rather than trying to get petrochems and aviation back to where they were before the pandemic hit.
I think for me, like in terms of how might a green recovery look like for Singapore? I mean, there are several commentary pieces out there already, but for me, something that stands out is this element of people in the green recovery process. So the people subgroups that I'm thinking about, there's two. So one is in terms of the leadership in the task force, and then the other one is like people in terms of like the individual citizens. So with regards to the first one, on the kind of leadership or the kind of task force we need to lead us through this green recovery and like to like they always say, like emerge stronger, right, post COVID. I mean, something that Climate Conversations has brought up the past couple of months is that they questioned, or not they questioned, but they highlighted that there is a need to strengthen the task force to make it more representative of our society. So they said stuff like, we should include more members from the people sector, people who are, from vulnerable groups, more businesses which are representative of a climate safe future into the task force, right? So I think these are things that we should push for when we talk about a green recovery, like what can that task force and leadership look like, right? And I think as regular citizens, like I think we should also question and not be satisfied easily with the kind of task force we have, right? So as citizens, we can also like, you know, write in and ask questions like, oh, how were the members of the task force identified? What's their terms of reference? Is it possible to add in more members in the next cycle, for example? I think these are questions that regular citizens can also write in and ask and make that leadership team or task force team more aware, so that in the working process towards a green recovery system, it perhaps, you know, can be a bit more solid, or it could be enhanced with more diverse views. So that's one. And then green recovery in terms of like what individual citizens can do. So this one I'm thinking with the context that Singapore, I think last month announced that we were projecting we're going to create something like 55,000 jobs in the next 10 years, which to me sounds like a great number, but like how actually can we get there, and like get there in the sense like we don't really like have to depend on the government all the time. So I think there's also the element of what the individual citizens can do. So what we can do, I think there's several things, right? Like continually upgrade ourselves and maybe like sign up for classes like sustainability reporting classes. There's a few providers out there. Do things like maybe now in Singapore, like being agile is a big thing, and like agility in the business concept, right? So maybe also like upgrade yourselves through those kinds of business courses, and then get yourselves into the private sector and leverage on that, and then slowly start to push for sustainability initiatives within the private sector if the company hasn't already done so. So I think like individually there's a lot of opportunities for people to tap on, like improve ourselves, and then like find those sort of like entryways into other organizations and see how we can push forth the sustainability or green recovery agenda. So yeah, so for me, I feel like there's lots of opportunity and lots of commentaries out there, but like what I would like to focus on is on this like people aspect of the green recovery process.
Nice, thank you so much. I think our conversation is also going towards the final question, which is us as our youths who are tuning into the live stream today, what are the actionables that they can do? So I know that Shuri mentioned looking at your own community and seeing how you can add in that green element into it, and Lashina also, especially in terms of your future job career prospects. So maybe the last 2 or 3 responses we can tap a little bit more onto what kind of calls to action would you like to leave our audience with today?
I can start. I would say, like, if you are interested in, or like, no, not if you are interested, if you are concerned about the climate crisis, I think the first thing to do is actually to find out more about what's happening, right? So like go for events, so you can check them out on the Lepak Energy calendar. But also like do your own readings of like what scientists are writing, what governments are saying, and then yeah, and also I guess learn more about the local context that you are at. So like if you're Singapore, learn more about like Singapore's context, and you know, yeah, use all these information to paint yourself a picture of what the world looks like, and then from there you can try and see like if there's any groups that you would like to join, or anything that you yourself want to do, then you can slowly start to do that kind of stuff. Yeah, but like learning more and knowing the context is very, very important.
Thank you, Sang Tian.
Maybe I can share next. So I think for me, like in terms of the next steps, right, and what individuals can do, I think like as and I'm just saying this, talking to people who are new to this, right? So like the way I think it is, you know, think about the 3 steps of a human-centered design process, like to inspire, ideate, and implement So I think just to keep it simple, right? So like the inspiration phase, like what Xiang Tian mentioned, try to get to know what's going on in Singapore. But also I think to add on to that, try to talk to people and learn what they are doing. And I think there's many inspirational figures out there, and lots of people are doing good work. But maybe I can also at this point highlight two that I think are doing great work in Singapore. In terms of like they're not only doing advocacy work, but I think like they analyze the impact of their work a lot, and I think that's something that people also need to take note of and see how we can improve on our own initiatives. So like in this inspiration phase, like two figures that I think people should look into is Samantha Tien, who runs Sustainable, and she recently did the cleanups at East Coast Beach, right? And then there's also Lee Sing from Green Nudge. So I mean, he started off with a simple concept, but I think now he's expanding to other activities. But basically, with these two and what they're doing with their organizations, I feel like you can really see the tangible outcomes of their work. And it's just, to me, like it's important to find not only inspirational stories, but like inspirational stories of tangible outcomes, which would motivate you to do something more or to do something about it. So inspiration, ideation, I think like each and every one of us has tons of ideas we want to run through. I think it's important to just brainstorm and then identify things that we really want to work on. And how we can do that is maybe just sit down and ask ourselves, what is that one superpower you have which you want to use to then work on something and address the climate issue. So like for me, if you look into my profile, like I focus on advocacy because I know my strength is in events organizing and a bit of people management. So like to me, that's how I do things, right? But then there's other people who are good with maybe science and they look into data and they do work that's mostly like science and data related. And it's just, to me, it's like just having different individuals and different skill sets and strengths and trying to do something to just better with what's happening in the world, and that's okay, right? There's no right or wrong answer to this. And the third part is in terms of implementation. So I think like with whatever ideas we have in mind, just take that idea a step forward and go and tap on like various funds and grants we have in Singapore. I mean, there's funds from National Youth Council, from NEA, now under MUA or under MSE, you have the SG Eco Office Fund. There's also fund from private sectors, from the social sectors. So, I mean, I guess in Singapore's context, these are the financial/resource pool is quite big. So I think it's then important to tap on these things and just run our ideas and see how we can implement them to help shape a better Singapore. Yeah, that's it from my end.
Nice. Thank you so much, Lastrina. I really like that we ended on this very empowering and inspiring note. I think it's important to remember that each individual, we are standing in the middle of overlapping circles, right, of our own skills, what we're interested in, as well as communities that we're part of, and being able to add that green touch or thinking about sustainability while we are in these communities with the tools that we have is the first way or the first step we can take when we want to work towards environmental action. So thank you so much, panelists, for your time today. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. I think I really enjoyed the discussion. We went from talking about the backdrop of the COVID crisis, what it tells us about the climate crisis, what can we learn from it, and then finally concluding with what our viewers today can take home with. So with that, I'll invite you all to take a step back and have a great day ahead. Thank you so much for your time. And I'll be doing a quick closing summary of the live stream today. So bye. Thank you. They're all like mouthing because they muted. Okay. So for those who are with us today, you have known that we have invited 3 very special speakers. Unfortunately, not including me, but I'm also very special. So the first speaker who we have is from the Philippines. His name is Sian. I thought it was particularly interesting when he talked about the shift away from profit into a world that is more pro people and pro environmental. I think for him it's very real when he experiences that inequality in suffering these climate consequences, because he lives in Manila, but he's also very aware of the consequences in other rural communities. So, for example, he talks about how the 100 energy companies are in charge of producing 71% of carbon emissions, which is insane. It's really insane. And then he was very passionate talking about climate education and how we can bring them into schools all around the world. After that, we have Andrew from Indonesia and Trend Asia. He talked to us about coal-fired power plants in Indonesia, and being a researcher, he was really knowledgeable about it. I was taken aback and also very blown away by what he knows. I think one line that really stood out for me as he was sharing was how we should move away from calling it climate change, but instead refer to it as a climate crisis, because it has been changing for so many years to the point where we know it's an emergency and something has to be done about it. And once again, he flagged out how we have to stop putting the interest of profit and the interest of a small group of people over that of everyone else in the community, which he has witnessed firsthand. And he also talked about how when we talk about divestment and investing in coal power plants, that moving the problem by investing in other countries while claiming our country isn't part of that investment. It's not actually solving the problem, which I thought was quite interesting insight. Lastly, we had Prof. Winston Chow, who brought to us many C's, including C for Winston Chow, and also C for IPCC. He spoke. He had a very insightful approach to what was Singapore's role in the global sphere, with his experience in the IPCC, as well as being a prof very specialized in this subject. What I thought was particularly interesting was when he gave us very concrete and niche ways that we could, as a nation, work towards being more sustainable, being a leader in this field, such as targeting big industries, investing in carbon capture. And I thought his message of hope was also something that's quite impactful, because for those who are watching here today who have been quite involved in the environmental scene, it might be something that can be quite draining and demoralizing at times. Some days we just need a break, or some days we just feel like, are we effed, like what he says. But I hope that what all of you have taken away from today's session specifically is that just as how there is a lot of work to do, it also means that there is a lot of work left that we can do. And I hope that each and every one of you have been inspired to find something, your calling, your unique way that you can contribute to the environment. So with that, I would invite Hongri to now screen share a slide of our feedback form as well as our Fridays for Future recruitment form. So on the right, you will see our recruitment form for Fridays for Future. Please follow us on Instagram to keep continuously updated on what's up with us. If you're interested in the work that we do, which is student outreach and getting in touch with policymakers, please sign yourself up through the form. But as Sian mentioned, we can organize ourselves in many different ways. And if you feel that the way that you want to contribute to the community could be through other organizations, I urge you to seek out for them as well. Many of them were on the panel today, and there are also many, many more that you can look for in the local community. For those who signed up for this live stream through your email, you can look out for a follow-up email with more details about us. And you can also sign up for our newsletter on the website. So for those of you who are wondering what is next for Fridays for Future, for local students in Singapore, we are currently working with many other organizations to do up a study guide for general paper. I know, studying, boo, but this time, studying guide will be specially focused on climate change topics as well as local social issues, because we also acknowledge that a very big part of taking exams is learning and internalizing the information. And I think it's very interesting how we can use exams as a way to bring real life issues really deeply rooted in the real things that are going on today. So if you could go back to the feedback form slide, we are, after all, a group of youths organizing this event with the help of many kind people as well. We want to thank you for coming and tuning in today, and as well as all of our speakers, our panelists, people behind the scenes, our tech support, Kai and Dave, as well as the previous facilitators, Min and Hong, as well as myself. So it would really mean a lot to us if you could do the feedback form to tell us how we can improve or how we have done well, so we feel good about ourselves, and also know how we can continue to work better in the future. So we'll be leaving this link in our description as well as in the chat right now. So please do fill it up, and we really hope that you have had a great afternoon tuning in, whether you are working on something else in the background or you have been with us the whole way. We really appreciate this, and it's because of the community and you guys who are tuning in that we work so hard. So with that, we wish you a great Saturday and Sunday ahead. Take care of yourselves. Remember to wear your mask, unlike me. And we hope to see you at our next Fridays for future event. Bye!